Hello, and welcome to this session of the 2021 online KBHC experience, an offering of Cormont Music and our gift to the horn community. In this session, we feature a presentation by Karen Houghton, private horn instructor, freelancer, co-author of the popular horn method book, Recipe for Success, co-owner of Houghton Horns, and a grandma to 8 beautiful grandchildren. Derek Wright, Texas freelancer and co-owner of Houghton Horns, and Dennis Houghton, freelancer, educator, and head craftsman at Houghton Horns. I'm your moderator, Kyle Schober, Eastman doctoral student, active freelancer, and teacher. Cormont Music's ability to offer the online KBHC experience, Horn Camp Connect, and Winterlude as our gift to the horn community is made possible by contributions from our donors. We want to extend our deepest thanks to them as their generosity has had a profound impact on Cormont's mission to present high-quality horn education in a consistent and meaningful way. All contributions make a difference. Please consider making a donation in any amount by visiting horncamp.org. Before we proceed with the session, a few more Zoom housekeeping items. So that we may be able to hear the presentation, we've muted all participants. Please stay muted for the duration of the session unless one of our presenters asks you to unmute. If you click on Participants at the bottom of the screen, you should see a participant list pop up with your name at the top. If the name associated with your Zoom account is different from your own first and last name, please click on the blue More button next to your name, select Rename, and enter your first and last name. This will help us know who it is we are communicating with. If you click Chat at the bottom of the screen, you should see the chat box appear. Comments posted in the chat are affected by the drop-down menu above the text box. Depending on your selection, your comments may be viewed by everyone or by individual participants. Each time that you enter a comment into the chat, please double-check your selection so that your comment is seen by your intended audience. And with that, I'll hand the session off to Karen.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Am I okay?
Good? Yep, you sound just fine.
Okay. Great. All right. Thank you. I've been a private teacher for over 45 years. And actually, Dennis, my husband, was my first student. He was a sophomore, and I was a junior at Los Alamitos High School in Orange County, California. So I began building a small studio at Cal State Long Beach at the university. And the band and orchestra directors kept referring students to me. So I got to where I had about 10 students while I was in school. And really that was plenty because I was also freelancing a little bit. I had a job which thankfully was playing my horn. But I was still very busy with classes and such. So I could only handle about 10. And then, let's see, fast forward, we got married and ended up in Texas. And I slowly built a very successful studio here. When my kids were little, I taught maybe 15 to 20 kids. And in Texas, they have a program where you can go into the schools and teach. And it's not like that everywhere. But we're fortunate to have that in Texas. So I was able to, drop the kids off at school and then do my private lessons and then be back in time for them when they came home from school. So it worked out really well. And then later, as they started growing up and becoming more independent, I probably had a maximum of, I would say, 55 students, and that's a lot. I actually know a lot of teachers that teach up to 70, and I can't even imagine that. So, but 50, 55 was enough. I was busy, I was a soccer mom and, freelancing and that, and so that was plenty. So I'd like to share some insights about some of the things that I learned through my experience of teaching privately. Some of you may already be teaching, and some of you may be thinking, oh, I'll never teach. but you never know. You may need to supplement your income at one point, and you just may have a desire to teach. So hopefully I can address some issues here during this session, questions you might have. So the title of my talk is 10 Steps for Building and Maintaining a Successful Private Studio. So I'm going to start with number 1. Contact the area band directors. And you can network by emailing them. Just go to the website, school website, and their names will be there along with their email. Email them, do a short introduction. You also might want to inquire what or who the other teachers are. Maybe not even just horn teachers, just the other private teachers in the area where you're going to be living and working. So number 2, set up an interview with the fine arts administrator. And that's another thing you can find online. Each school district will have a fine arts coordinator, hopefully. And that information will be on the district website. I think you should be willing to send a resume in and maybe even play a mini audition. It's hard for me to think back that far, but I believe I did a little like 5-minute audition in the fine arts administrator's office whenever I started teaching, a long time ago. So be prepared to do that. I think it wouldn't hurt if you had a videotape or an audio tape of your playing, just so that they know that you can teach and play. They want to know a little bit more about you. So number 3 is don't overcommit. Now this comes after you've gotten the job and you're plugged into a school. When you start teaching and start having success with your students, they're going to be knocking on your door. Can you teach so-and-so here? Can you teach so-and-so there? So just be careful not to see all the dollar signs in your eyes and overcommit, take too many students on. Because, especially if you're in a degree plan, that you may not have that much time. Take in consideration that you may want to freelance in addition. So this leads into the 4th point, which is super important for me. Be present every week. And I cannot emphasize that enough. I have known so many people whose reputations have been tarnished because they take on a lot of students and then they either drop them or a gig will come up in the middle of the week and they'll just say, oh, I'd rather do that. So, they just go to the gig. I think if you think about what you would, the consideration that you would appreciate, do the same thing for your students and band directors. So if you know ahead of time that you're going to miss, then let them know. But students really depend on us to be physically present and mentally present. So it's super, super important. Number 5 would be choose a curriculum. So which books do you want to use to supplement the band method? Now, I'm going to do a shameless plug here. This is my favorite book. Janet and I wrote this together. It's a beginning horn method that takes you from day 1 really all the way through probably the first 5 years. So if you have some high school students that have bought the book, they will still have plenty to do in the book by the time they reach the end of high school. Okay, number 6, write weekly lesson plans. Now, this is just me. I tend to be a little bit OCD about this. Like, I like to have an outline and I like to know what I'm going to do before I go in there. I know some teachers that kind of just go in and it's like whatever, how the Spirit moves them. I don't work that way. If you can do that, that's great. But I think having a plan is also good because it communicates to the kids that you take your job seriously. And I just wouldn't recommend winging it. I would recommend using some lesson plans and an outline. Okay, number 7 is balance the lesson. Okay, so if you're teaching in the schools like we do in Texas, of course the school bell will ring and there goes your lesson. I mean, it's timed. Um, if you teach at home or in a studio, you can set up that time however you want. You can set up 30-minute lesson, 45-minute lesson. But I always set an alarm when I'm teaching in my studio here in Keller, because I will get distracted and, pretty soon it's like you cut 10 minutes into the next student's time. So it's easy to get distracted, especially with a student that's, really into what you're trying to teach. So yeah, it's easy to get distracted. Other times you're like watching the clock. It's like, oh my gosh, is this lesson over? Yeah, I have a few of those too. But for the most part, I enjoy all my kiddos. So set an alarm. And as far as balance of the material, a good private teacher should cover a variety of material in a short amount of time. So that means that, you have to come in with a plan. For instance, do low range exercise, high range exercise, technical exercise, and work on some music. As a private teacher, it's part of your responsibility to help the students learn how to practice more efficiently. So, when you do that, you're modeling for them what a practice session should look like. So don't get caught up. Sometimes the kids will say, oh, can you help me with my band music? Well, yes, for a little bit, but we're also going to do the other things on my agenda. So make sure that you're hitting all the different areas on the horn. Number 8 is communicate with the parents. This is really important. Send an introductory letter to new students. Now that's, again, if you're teaching in the schools. If you have somebody coming to you, then you can, make a point of introducing yourself. I don't know, sometimes parents will just sit in the car and they'll send their kid in, and I'm like, well, I need to meet that parent. So after the lesson, I'll go out, follow him out to the car and introduce myself. Also, detail your payment options. During COVID, most of my kids were paying, parents were paying PayPal or Venmo, Zelle, sometime before it was a check or cash or whatever. So detail how you want your payments to be made. I would recommend sending invoices out. I personally don't do them at this time, but I think it's a really good practice to do that. And then you can also put in your introductory letter any kinds of policies like absence. Like if a student is absent, what is your policy? Are you going to make the lesson up, or are you not going to? Make sure it's all in writing so that it's clear and upfront and the parents understand what is expected of them and the kids. And also materials that you would like them to purchase. Make sure that's all in writing. And as far as the money, the one other thing I would say is you need to remember that being self-employed means that they don't take taxes out. So you have to withhold some of your money that you're making, because otherwise the IRS will really bite you at the end. So you have to really, think ahead a little bit and don't spend it all. Okay, the next topic, number 9, is communicate with the band directors. Okay, so a monthly check-in is really great for a band director. They act sometimes like they're super busy, but if you really are interested in talking with them, they will make time for you. So I think I let my band directors know kind of just generally what we're covering. And it also solidifies the alliance between you and the band director. And that's a really important alliance because it's just like, co-parenting. You have to present a united front to the students. And And there may be some situations that arise, and you'll be very thankful that you have the band director on your side. So just keep them updated. You could also ask them if there's something that they would like you to cover in your lessons. I mean, sometimes it is part of the band music that's maybe giving the kids trouble, and of course, yes, help them. It seems like every year I've got a band director coming up to me and saying, we've got stopped horn. How do you do that again? So that opens a perfect opportunity for me to teach my students stopped horn, and the band directors who need to be taught as well, oftentimes. So anyway, the whole idea is that you are part of a team. You don't have to feel like you're out there all by yourself teaching these kids, even though you don't see the band directors every day necessarily, but you are part of the team, and you are helping make the success of your student. So, all right, and then the last one is attend functions whenever possible. Now, if I went to every concert that every kid had, I wouldn't even have time to teach. So it's obviously not feasible to do that all the time. But sometimes you can find contests or concerts where there's, several of your kids that are participating. And I really try and do that at least once or twice a year. And you will really be appreciated by the band directors. They'll, make a point of going up afterwards and saying, hey, that was great. I really enjoyed it. The kids' faces light up. They just love it when they see their private teacher out in the audience. So it just shows that you support them and what they're doing. Okay, so that is the conclusion of the 10 topics that I wanted to talk about. So hopefully somebody's got some questions. I mean, I can maybe try and answer if anyone has any pedagogy questions even, or more details about what I teach in my lessons, or I believe there's a, Kyle, are you gonna, somebody's monitoring a chat line, I believe. So
Yeah.
so please, if you have thought of anything during the course of this discussion here, just go ahead and write it down, and I'll see if I can answer it.
So we do have a few questions. Our first one is from Julie, and she's asking, how do you manage to have 55 students? Are all of their lessons a half hour, or do you have a mix of lengths between them?
Well, I don't do that anymore. When I did have 55 students, I counted them as half-hour students. So, like, I may not see 55 faces, but, because there were several kids that took an hour. But it's, I counted them as half-hour slots. And, it's really not, when you think about it, it's not a whole lot of time. I was just talking to a friend about this. Like, I'm teaching this summer, I'm teaching 30 lessons, which feels like a lot to me. But it's only 15 hours a week, because I made them all half hours. I said no hour lessons in the summer. Your teacher needs a break. So it's not very much time, but it's a lot of energy goes into teaching. I mean, it's very tiring. I mean, it'll wear you out, and that's another reason not to get overcommitted. So if 55 is too many, then you will learn your threshold. And like I said, there's a lot of people that I know that teach a lot more than that, and they do fine. I would go insane. I really would. I wouldn't be able to handle it.
Great, thank you. And our next question is from Hannah, and she asks, at what age or experience level do you think it's appropriate for someone to start teaching lessons?
That's a good question. It's a really good question. Well, I mean, I started in high school, and I mean that with Dennis, and it was really like the blind leading the blinder, because I didn't really know much at that point either. I had barely, I mean, I started in the 8th grade, and I didn't have a private lesson until 11th grade. So basically, I was just kind of teaching him what I had been taught. And I am a much better teacher today than I was back then, hopefully. So you learn as you go. I think it just has to do with how you feel about your abilities to relate to young kids and communicate with them. And if you have a desire, I really think, honestly, without getting too sappy, it's really a calling. If you feel that desire to teach, then you should go ahead and look into getting some students.
Excellent. The next one is again from Julie, and she's asking if you ever teach horn sectionals in the local schools, or do you only teach private lessons?
I do teach horn sectionals. I have a flat rate, and usually when someone calls, I'll say, yeah, I'd be glad to do that if it fits in my schedule. I won't cancel students for it, but if I can move them around, I will do that. So that should be a different, it just depends on what area you're in, but you need to decide what's fair as far as teaching. Somebody asked me at the last time I did this presentation, they said, should we do things for free? And that was hard. I had to think about it for a little bit, and I ultimately said no. Because even if you're a college student and you're wanting to teach and you're desperate to have students and you're thinking, I'm just going to contact this band director and I'm going to do everything he wants for free. Well, that's kind of saying that, that you're not worth paying for. So, even if you're in college, you've gone through horn class, you've gone through years of lessons, usually by that time. So if you feel the desire to teach, then I think it's worth charging,
Absolutely. And I actually have a small follow-up one on that from myself. Do you find that the sectionals are a good recruiting tool for your own private studio? Do you get a lot of students from doing things like that?
I have, yes. When I was teaching and, had my full load of students, yeah, I would definitely get calls after that. And that's kind of tricky too, because I am very leery of taking on somebody else's student. Like if someone wants to switch, they have to go to their teacher and they have to explain to them. I won't take anybody that just wants to switch over. I just, I don't want to step on anybody's toes, and I'm not looking to steal anybody's students. So I make sure that they understand that they have to get it cleared with their current teacher.
Absolutely. So our next question is from Aaliyah, who asks, what prompted you to write Recipe for Success? Did you find that there was something missing from the other methods already written?
Oh, yes. Yes. Before we wrote it, we took all the method books we could find and put them on the kitchen table and went through them all. And the big thing that was missing was just the pedagogy part. Because you have instructions here in the book, and it's kind of like the Farkas book for little kids. In terms of, it's not set up like the Farkas book, but it does have some explanations and if there's an exercise, it explains why you're doing the exercise and what you can look to get out of the exercise, which I feel is important. I feel like if I'm going to practice something, I want to know why. I want to know what it's going to do for me. But also we found a big void in teaching low horn because most band methods, most band directors, they teach what's on the page, and the kids don't play low. And so then when they get into high school or beyond, they have real trouble in the low register. So we were very committed to establish a really strong low register. In fact, one of the benchmarks for our sixth graders, our beginners, is to be able to go down to a low C. And usually people go, what? But if they're set up correctly, it's not a problem.
I think we all thank you for that. I know when I got to college first, my low horn was definitely not as strong as my high horn. Okay, our next question is Elizabeth, And she says, you may have already covered this, but how do you keep track of all your students, like in terms of record keeping specifically?
Oh gosh. Okay. Oh, true confessions. I'm not very good at it. I really am not very good at it. I've tried different programs and different, like keeping track on a piece of paper. I'm not really technology is not my forte. So I'm sure there are a lot of really good programs out there now, and I would definitely recommend that. But for me, it just becomes overwhelming. So I basically tell my parents, if you want to study with me, you need to keep track of your payments. And I do send out monthly reminders, like, please check to make sure you've paid your balance for lessons. And I would not recommend doing it that way, though. I really wouldn't. I would recommend looking into some kind of app or something that you can get to help you track those lessons.
Great. And our next question is from Julie, who asks, have you ever worked with a student that you decided to pass along to another teacher? And what's your criteria for making that decision?
Yes, actually I have. Two in my 45 years of teaching. Actually, one of them actually did move on to another teacher. The other one kind of came begging back, crawling back. It was an attitude issue. This one student was like, he would come in, 8th grader, he would come in and say, okay, today I want to work on this, or let's do this. And I would be like, no, I have my own plans. And he would interrupt me when I was talking. He would play when I was trying to talk. And I just finally had to have a come to Jesus meeting with him, and I said, look, this is obviously not working. You're not respecting what I'm doing, and I can't work this way. And called his parents and said, your son might be better off with a different teacher. So that was what happened. But I will never give up on anybody if they're trying. And I have some kids that, they could barely play their way out of a paper bag. I keep thinking, wow, they've improved since they've taken lessons with me. My goodness, what would they be like without lessons? But I don't know, I have a passion for people, and I love my students as individuals, and I want to see them all reach their potential. And some of them obviously are going to be superstars, and others are not. Others are just going to enjoy the horn, love music. That's what I want to make sure that I'm getting through to the kids. I want them to love the instrument and love music and support the arts.
Absolutely. So we have a couple more questions, and then we're just about ready to move on to our next session. But our next question is from Susan, who asks, does your book include info for a brand new student who has never touched a horn?
Yes. Starts from day one. Day one. So it's divided into categories. There's 5 categories in the book. It's set up, you can see it's called Recipe for Success. So it's got a food theme throughout. And we have 5 categories: fruits and vegetables, which is basically range studies. And we have technique, and we have, that's meat. And we have music, which is grains, dairy, which is tone production, and then dessert, which is like games and duets and other fun stuff. So, but there are 3 levels. So when I start, I actually started 3 students during quarantine on Zoom. So it was kind of a little scary because, that's just the idea of starting someone. But it's, thankfully, the book was very helpful because there's pictures in there, and everything that you'll ever need is in that book. Even if I hadn't written it, I would be singing its praises. It really saved me during quarantine. So everything was right there in one place. But then you would give your student, your beginner student, once they got set up with the embouchure and everything, which is all that stuff's in the book. Then you'd give them their baby lip slur, their baby mini scale, stuff like that. So it works really well for a beginner.
Perfect. And our last question for now is Susan again, and she asks, how do you help someone, or how do you help with ergonomics for someone whose horn just doesn't fit well?
Ooh, go to a repairman. I mean, because like some of the horns, I'm imagining they're talking about the left hand, and a lot of the horns nowadays have the adjustable pinky rings and thumb levers. Um, I actually have a pretty small hand, and when I was playing a con years ago, my husband, he unsoldered it and moved the pinky ring closer to me so that I didn't have to stretch. But that is a really important question because if a student is uncomfortable with the left hand, that can cause posture problems. Posture problems can cause embouchure problems. Embouchure problems can be just devastating for a young horn player. So it's all related. So that's good that you're paying attention to that. And I just would see if they have another horn at the school for them, or see if they could give them permission to, maybe adjust some of the valve levers can be lowered, strings and stuff. So there's things you can do, a repairman could do to help that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us and for answering all these questions.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure. Thanks.
All right, and so we're going to move on to our next presentation segment now, and we'll be taking more questions during this. So if you have them, keep them coming. We want to get as many answered as we possibly can. But for now, I'll hand the session off to Derek.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Derek Wright from Houghton Horns, and I'm going to tell you about a little device called the BIAS system today. BIAS stands for Brass Instrument Analysis System, and it consists of a powerful piece of software and a powerful piece of hardware. The hardware is this device here. Now, you're probably wondering, what is this used for? This is mostly used by manufacturers to help develop and test their instruments. It was made by an institute in Vienna. I actually got the privilege to go to Vienna to learn how to use the system. Why do we have it? Aside from just curiosity, we have used it to help develop our Varus horns, especially our last Varus KX model horn. We've also used it to develop our mouthpieces and to test our mouthpieces. So the way this works is you put a mouthpiece into it. In case you're curious, the mouthpiece I have, you only see the little end of the mouthpiece. The device actually comes apart, and you put the mouthpiece into it. I have the model mouthpiece that I use in here. It is the Varus PF model, which is a copy of a block letter Farkas model from the 1960s. It's a very middle of the road mouthpiece, and it's the one that I use. So I like the fact that it's middle of the road. It shouldn't affect the intonation too much, and that I get to test with the same mouthpiece that I play on. So I'm getting ahead of myself. What does this system even tell you? So it can analyze a lot of things, but today we're going to be talking about the intonation. We're going to be talking about the pulse response, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later, and the impedance, which we're also going to get into a bit later. So why should you care? A lot of the results really confirms a lot about what your teachers have told you all these years. And in some ways, it can get you to think carefully as to whether some normal pieces of wisdom are really true. So let me demonstrate this in motion here for a moment. So you put it into the horn. And one complication when testing French horns, aside from compared to testing other brass instruments, you can just put it in the instrument and test the instrument. With horn, you're not going to get an accurate result unless you use your hand. So you have to hold it in position and use a correct hand position as well. And as we know, hand position changes a lot about our sound and response and the intonation, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really important that you use a correct hand position while doing this. If we have some time, we'll actually take a look at some measurements that I took with the bad hand position to see what effects that has. So this is the software here. And we'll do a quick measurement here just so that we can get, I can show you how it works. So it's going to give me 3 seconds once I set off the machine, and it's going to send a wave through the instrument. And it just continues on. I'm not going to bore you by taking full measurements. I've taken some in preparation for this session, so I'm going to go ahead and commit those to the program. And first, let's take a look at one of the horns behind me, which is a Finca Westphalia. So I was able to take these measurements a little earlier today.
Hey, Derek, before you
Yes.
do that, the screen is just a little small for the audience. Is there any way you can make that window bigger so it's easier to see?
There we go.
Perfect.
Any better?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the horn I measured today. Finca Westphalia, made by Johannes Finca. This horn is about mid $6,000 range in case you're not familiar with it. So first off, of course, everyone's interested in the intonation. And I hope you guys can see this well. Let me this restore. Here we go. For some reason, it doesn't like it when you play around with the windows in this piece of software. But here we go. So we can see, hopefully we can see all of the notes here. These are written in the key of F. So the notes that are corresponding to what you would see in the key of F. And this is open B flat horn. So we can see F at the bottom of the staff is 5 cents sharp. By the way, what you'll notice is that no horn is perfectly in tune. There are all sorts of compromises that makers make with all of the tapered parts of the instrument. It's the tapered parts of the instrument that determine, that do the most to determine intonation. So that's the lead pipe. So the lead pipe, of course, coming from the mouthpiece. There is the first branch, which goes from this ferrule on top of the instrument back to the valve cluster. And then you have the bell, tail, and flare. So those are the tapered parts of the instrument. And there are infinite ways to create a taper. Thus, that's why a piece of software like this exists. And because there's no perfect way to make the taper to create perfect intonation, every maker has to play around to see exactly how they want notes to respond. So we see here, F at the bottom of the staff is 5 cents sharp. You would never play A open B flat horn, and that's why. 22 cents flat. I've seen some horns register as much as 60 cents flat on A in the staff on open B flat horn. So that's why we don't use that. C is 1 cent sharp. F at the top of the staff is 9 cents sharp. So this interval here from C in the staff to F at the bottom of the staff is a little wide. It's better than being narrow. Sadly, never perfect. Up to A at the top of the staff, which is 5 cents flat. Skipping G, which is dead on, perfect. And then high C, which is always, always, always sharp. High C is a sharp note on basically every single instrument. If it's not sharp, it means everything else is probably screwed up. So if you have a high C, don't beat yourself up. If you have a sharp high C, don't beat yourself up over that. You could just join the club. So what are we going to have to do on that high C? If we know it's sharp on every horn, you're going to have to use your hand to cover down and lower that note. So aside from intonation, let's talk a little bit about impedance. Acoustical impedance. So those of you who are engineers and other professionals like that will know impedance normally as an electrical term, but it also affects sound waves and instruments as well. So impedance is basically the amount of resistance that that the horn gives. So the resistance shows up in between the notes here. And the parts where it peaks are the parts where the horn provides minimal resistance. And that's where the notes come out. So for example, if you go up the harmonic series, you can actually hear each note snap out as you hit each one of those peaks. So each one of those snaps that you hear when you go up the harmonic series like that, those are the parts where the horn, it pops out because the horn doesn't want to give you resistance there, while the rest of the time you're fighting the resistance. But one thing I want to draw your attention to on this chart, look how narrow each one of those peaks are. Even on a note on a horn with so-called wide slots, the peaks are really narrow. I'm going to zoom in here a bit. And we can see like the part of the note where the horn gives its all is very, very narrow. If I move this just to be 10 cents sharp, look at how much energy I lose just by playing 10 cents sharp. So by playing 10 cents sharp, not only am I fighting more resistance, thus working harder than I should be, I'm also not going to be able to get the most out of the sound. Sonically, what you notice when you're not playing at the peak is that the horn starts to sound covered. So if you have a student or you're struggling with the sound that's a little too covered and a little too stuffy, a lot of the times the problem is that you're just not playing at the center of the note, and it's an acoustical thing. If you're not at the center of the note, you can't open up the horn as much as it should be opened up. When you're at the center here, the horn sound has a really great sparkle and a pop. Let's move this to like I'm playing 20 cents sharp now. I'm playing 20 cents sharp. I'm now like getting close to halfway down the energy that the horn should be giving out. At that point, the horn is really going to sound covered and really going to sound stuffy. And of course, the hand plays a big part to being stuffy as well, but just on your own time, try an experiment. If you keep your hand straight, not covering down, but straight, and you put your hand farther inside the bell, logic would tell you that it's going to sound more covered. But that's not going to be the case. If you're playing at the center of the note, you'll notice you can place the hand farther into the bell, and sometimes the horn will sound even more open. So that's what it means to center a note. And I just find this chart absolutely fascinating because you can truly see how much energy you lose when you're playing sharp or flat. That's really part of playing inefficiently. And of course, you can do exercises like the harmonic series exercise I just demonstrated, lip bends, all sorts of exercises out there to really find the center of the note. Key thing here, again, at the center of the note, the horn sound is going to really sparkle. So if you keep your ears open to make sure you're always playing with the best possible open sound, that's going to help you to hit the centers of those notes quite well. Okay, de-window this. And by the way, feel free to ask any questions, whether it be about acoustics or bias system or any other equipment-based question you may be interested in.
So, sorry, we actually do have one question from John. You were mentioning that every horn has a sharp high C, and John is wondering if even F descants and triple horns have sharp high Cs.
On the B flat horn, yes.
So, if I'm reading that correctly, it's a matter of the harmonic series placement and not the note itself, correct?
Correct. It's not even so much about the harmonic. It's most horn makers are going to sacrifice that note to make sure other notes are more in tune. Like you could design a horn with the goal of a perfect high C, but you're going to screw up so many other things below that it's not worth it. Sacrifice the high C that people don't play that often. But yeah, on horns with high F sides, for example, actually, you know what? I have some measurements from a triple here. This is a Rico Kuhn triple W393X. And let's take a look. Okay. So yeah, on this one, we have a sharp high C as well. This is the open high F side. And of course, that's high E, which is super sharp. But really, if you were going to use this, you can I'm going to go ahead and just tune it down. Let's say I'm tuning the high F side to high C. Okay, there I can tune the high F side to high C. And we get a high C that's in tune. We get a high G that's in tune. And this is really the range that you're going to be using the descant horn in the most. But if you're going to do that, don't play C in the staff on that. At least on this horn, don't play C in the staff on high F horn. Unless you want to be 38 cents flat.
Excellent. And we have another question from Jeremy, who asks if you can repeat what the tool is called again, and he wants to know if it's also useful for non-horn manufacturers.
This costs about $10,000, not counting the travel to Vienna to learn how to use it. So it's definitely not like an everyday thing for people to purchase. But no, not really. It doesn't have much, considering the investment, it doesn't have much use outside of instrument manufacturing and development. Or, of course, there's also acoustical study and scientific study. I see someone saying this would make a great doctoral dissertation. I got mine done 10 years ago and I'm not doing another. But aside from research and manufacturing, no, I can't really see much other use. We also, since we have the machine, you'll notice many of the new horns on our website have these charts assigned. And then it's useful for people, especially if you can't come to the shop, to be able to see the charts and compare them and to help make a more informed buying decision before you have a horn sent out on trial, especially since most people can't afford to have more than one horn at a time sent out on trial. So I guess that's another use for it as well.
Excellent. And we'll take one more question for now, and then we'll let you get back to it and come back to some more later. Julie wants to know if you're able to actively use this information when working with students. An experienced professional has much more flexibility and command over their instrument and be able to change their approach based on the data. But is it worth addressing the data with younger students or student model horns?
Well, in some ways, it's actually would be more useful in student model horns because, frankly, student model horns are the instruments that are more likely to have problems. And it's not that it's a problem in the design itself, since most major instrument manufacturers will use a machine like this in their development. But what ends up happening is that basically the lower cost of the horn, the less time that's put into the horn. Every horn from $12,000 all the way down to like a $500 Chinese horn has the same amount of brass, the same quality of brass, the same components. It's the same cost level of raw materials. What you're paying for is that it takes someone 17 minutes to assemble this horn, or that it takes someone a month to assemble this horn. And of course, the quicker it's done, the more likely you're going to have flaws and issues with the construction and things like that. And so with student level horns, since you're more likely to see those flaws, you're more likely to have bad notes. So if I'm doing a measurement here and I have some bad measurements here. I'm sorry, I can't show them because I'm not willing to out any manufacturers on this call. But I've seen some horns where, like, third space C will be 26 cents sharp just randomly, and I'll do multiple measurements and it's the same way each time. Or like middle C will be like 20 cents flat. And in that case, with a student, if you have a horn that's doing something like that, um, then talking about centering and really trying to improve tone on those harmonics is gonna be a futile endeavor. Um, Now, how do you get the machine to test it? Yeah, I can tell you the base test on most horns is good, but there are horns that stick out as bad. Does that answer your question? I don't know if I actually answered your question.
Yeah, I think it does.
You can mention it.
Perfect. So we'll continue on with the presentation for now, and maybe we'll take a few more questions towards the end. And I'll give you a heads up when that's about to happen.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right. So the last thing I wanted to show you, so showed impedance, it showed intonation. Let's talk a bit about pulse response. And actually, I should have put my picture big screen. I have this fancy video switcher here, but I always forget to switch the video. So there I am again. Now back to the system. So we'll go back to the Finca Westphalia, and let's take a look at pulse response. That is the wrong button. Pulse response. So this is really cool. This is actually a visual representation of the length of the instrument. So if you take a look here, this dip here is where the mouthpiece of the horn starts, and it goes all the way over until this dip, which is the bell of the mouthpiece. And this axis here along the bottom is actually a measurement in centimeters. So with just the test that I did there with the head, I could actually zoom in here, and I can tell you that the acoustical length of this horn is about 277 centimeters on the open B flat side, which I don't know about you guys. I just find that amazing that anything can do that. Without taking a tape measure or really measuring anything, we can just tell what the acoustical length of the horn is. From a manufacturing standpoint, what this chart tells is if there are any obstructions in the horn. So if tubes weren't fit together really well, or there's like a piece of metal stuck in there or something like that, it's going to show up by having an abnormal dip or an abnormal peak here in the chart. But what we're interested here is this little number down here, which I know you probably can't see in the call, but it's the pulse response factor. The pulse response factor, in a very, very simplified way, is the amount of energy that it basically takes for the horn to start making noise, for the horn to respond. So the higher the number here, the less energy it takes to get the horn to speak. So the pulse response factor on the B flat side of this horn is 42.7. Now, if we take that and we can compare that to the open F side of this horn, it's 33.2. You'll also notice, of course, in this chart, the acoustical length of the F horn is much longer than the B flat horn because the F horn is longer. But also because of that, it's not your imagination. It actually physically takes more energy to get a note to start on the F side of the horn rather than the B flat side of the horn. So again, the B flat side of the horn is 42.7. The F side of the horn is almost 25% less. If that makes any sense. So just something to think about as you're practicing and as you're playing. You need to practice response on every single valve combination because the response throughout the horn is going to be different. I see I have 4 minutes left, so why don't I leave the rest of the time for some questions here?
Right, sure thing. We do have a few. Hannah would like to know if you were a student going into college looking to buy their first horn, what do you think a good price range would be?
A student going into college, really, I would recommend the $4,000 to $8,000 range. It's wide, but when you get down below 4, you're truly talking about student level horns. And and I guess by student level horns, I'm also talking like, because our Varus horns, which we're very proud of, the 5 and the 5G, are at $3,500. And we believe they're the best $3,500 horns that you can get, and would be great for like a music education major. But for a performance major, I would really be looking at like horns like the Hans Hoyer G10, which is 6,500, the Finca Westphalia, which is 6,500, the Yamaha 871, which is 7,000, the Dieter Otto horns like the Jeff Nelson, which is 79.95. We're selling those now, much better price than before, when we weren't selling them. The Yamaha 671, which is $5,000. Our Ferris KX would be a great option for that, which is also $5,000. So that's really the price range where I would say, and what you're paying for in that price range, again, more consistency in the horn, but also there's going to be a lot more research done in those horns to make sure that we get things like that pulse response factor to be as high as possible. We get those impedance. I didn't even get the chance to talk about this, but the higher those peaks are, it basically means the slottier the horn is. So get those impedance levels higher to get the intonation to be as usable as possible. That would be my recommendation there. Any other questions?
Yeah. Someone would like to know if you have ever used this to analyze an Alp horn.
No, I do not have an Alp horn, but I would love to analyze it one day. It could do it.
Great. And Jeremy would also like to know if there is data publicly available for different horns like this.
No.
Well,
No, there
sad.
isn't. Aside from, really, I think our website's the only place I've seen where these charts have been published. And we haven't, things are really busy, so I wish we've gotten a chance to. The idea was that we would test everything and put all of the charts on our website. It's a long going process that's in the making, but if you take a look, especially at our new premium horns, you'll find the charts on our website and can do comparisons there.
Great. And here's one last question from me, actually. So without a device like this handy, some notes are problem notes on certain horns. How would you go about determining whether or not it's a problem note or operator error on the horn without having one of these, or maybe to get one of these checked on it?
Well, one of these days I mean, if you're interested and you're in Texas, just email sales@houghtonhorns.com. And it's not going to be free, but it's not going to be expensive either if you want to have your horn analyzed. But the way I like to test it myself is, if any of you are familiar with the pedagogy of Bill Vermeulen, he really likes to talk about path exercises. And what I find is that it really works to find exactly where the center of a note is. So let me do a quick demonstration. So as you can see there, I'm bending the note down until the next note pops out. And wherever that next note pops out, it's gonna pop out right at the center. So you're basically causing the horn, you're kind of bending down, you're increasing that impedance, maximum resistance, and it's just gonna pop out right at the next peak. And that's a great way, especially like if you're a teacher, you're a more experienced player, and you can do that better than your students, to kind of see, okay, where is that note really? And if it pops out 20 cents flat, that's a great indication that, it may need looking into a bit more. Okay, is that any other questions? As you can see, I love talking about this. I just kind of I love geeking out on instruments and just talking about them. I could go on at length. As you can see, I'm really fun at parties.
Great. Yeah, so I think that's all we have for now, but this was super informative and awesome. I've really never seen anything like this before, so it's really interesting to see. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun. I want to be invited back to New Hampshire when it's back there, and I can see the family. But but thank you very much.
All right, so with that, we will move on to our last presenter, Dennis.
That's probably better. You can hear me now?
Yep, you're coming through just fine.
Okay. Derek's presentation, amazing. I had the privilege of traveling with him to Vienna and meeting the designer of this system. He also founded the Vienna Institute for Musical Acoustics, or the Vienna Tonklang Institute, I think was the name. But he's a horn player, played in the Vienna State Opera an entire career, 35 years, and founded the Institute, I think in the 90s. And then he got grants to fund the research that developed those tools. There is another acoustics professor in Germany that also did quite a bit of research and developed electronic tools. And then Engelbert Schmid develops his horns with the cooperation of that professor. The basic thing is, every one of us as horn players, we're taking advantage of the natural acoustical properties of this pipe, of this horn. So now I have the privilege of trying to, the folks at KHBC asked me for a title for my talk, and I had just seen a cool video on string theory on YouTube. So now I got to figure out how to tie string theory to horn repairs. I will say that string theory in physics states that there are tiny filaments of energy that make up all matter. And these filaments are the building blocks of atoms. Those filaments tie together everything in our world and make up every atom, every molecule, and they're the power behind light waves and the electromagnetic spectrum. String theory on the horn is somewhat different. So these strings provide the connection or the link between our fingers and the valves. Some of the horns that we sell have mechanical linkages. Many European models use mechanical linkages, and they're preferred by European players. But as an American horn player and repair guy, strings are quiet compared to mechanical linkages. They're adjustable for height for a larger or smaller player. And they provide really the most efficient mechanical connection to change the air direction of the valves. I thought I would take a few minutes and do a bit of rotary valve anatomy for you guys, and we'll actually disassemble a rotor, and I'll show you how to restring a rotor as well. Probably starting with, and we'll get back to the strings, but starting with the number one interface between your hand and the horn, the valve lever. This is the paddle, the top of the lever, the lever arm that connects to the string. People don't always know this, but where the hinge rod goes through, this is called the hinge tube, and the radial spring connects over the hinge tube. And then on every lever arm for a string action horn, there's the lever string screw. That's the final screw that you tighten when you're tying strings. The lever string screw, or the string, also connects to the stop arm. And here's a loose freestanding stop arm. But the stop arm rotates back and forth. Oh, gosh. And changes the direction of the airway. I'm not sure if you can see this clearly, but we have actually a cutaway rotary valve. And we did a valvectomy on a horn. And this shows the valve cap and the back bearing plate, if I can get it off. And then the rotor itself inside there. And the cutaway allows you to see how I can change the direction of the rotor and direct the air through the windways. And of course, that's what changes the sound, making your horn longer or shorter to give you a different harmonic series. The rotor itself, the inside turny part, is usually made of solid brass, and it's got a upper spindle on the center line of the valve and the larger lower spindle, and that's connected to the stop arm. And again, the stop arm rotates usually 90 degrees back and forth and stops against either, in this case, trying to get my camera on there, natural cork bumpers, which is really traditionally for the past 100 years, horns use that. And then nowadays we use synthetic material. This particular horn is using some like medium density silicone rubber. We have several different hardnesses and diameters of rubber that we use because it varies by brand. The different manufacturers want to, because of the design of the cork plate and other factors, you see different diameters. I'll probably remove a couple of these rotors for you guys. And first step that you learn as a repair technician is the rotor won't come out unless you take the valve cap off. And then the other thing I do, if a horn comes onto my bench for cleaning, first thing I want to do is get rid of the valve strings. So much for string theory. But easiest, quickest way is to just cut them. And I can get the strings off easier. Here I'm loosening the stop arm string screw. Usually a full turn or a turn and a half is enough to allow the string to slip out. And I'll just take the lever arm string screw loose. Pull that guy out too. The largest screw, the main rotor screw, is what holds the stop arm in place. And I like to use a large screwdriver to loosen that, because you can stress on it with a smaller screwdriver blade and it might slip. And then you scar up the head of the screw. And that doesn't look very good to your customer. This is, by the way, is a Hoyer. And Hoyer has a very long, narrow, slender main rotor screw. And those actually tend to snap sometimes because it's too thin. Most other American makes are beefier. Most other German horns actually have a beefier part. But we do try to stock these. They're hard to get, but we stock replacements or spares if you ever need one. You know that you're a professional technician after you've jabbed the screwdriver into your hand a number of times. The scar tissue builds up eventually, and then your skin gets tougher. Take out this other main rotor screw. And I use the smaller screwdriver is considered a jeweler's screwdriver. You can spin it, and that allows you to take the screws out more quickly. So I've got the valve caps off, first and second valve. So to remove them from the casings, we use a brass rod. The brass rod has a D shape cut on the end of it, and that matches the keyway and the top of the stop arm. It's possible to use other tools, and some in an emergency, if I was on stage and trying to restring my horn, I could take my valve out by tapping, backing out the main rotor screw and tap on the top of it with in this case, I have a nylon mallet, but in a pinch, I've used a board or the head of a screwdriver. There's, the mother of invention is necessity. So when you're limited on tools, you get creative. But day to day in the shop, we use these brass rods, and we actually sell those as part of our maintenance kit. So a few taps, and I just drove the spindle of the rotor through the stop arm, and the rotor came out the top of the valve casing. Here's the back bearing plate and the top of the rotor. This horn arrived at our shop about 4 days ago as a consignment, and it's been in line for a cleaning, and it certainly needs it. The blue buildup here is calcium carbonate and probably some copper carbonate. Partly that's from saliva, but it's also, and I've just come to realize this in the past year or so, we're exhaling carbon dioxide gases into our horn, and the carbon dioxide reacts with the walls of the instrument and grabs onto it, and it builds up as this calcium carbonate and copper carbonate. So any horn that's played for any period of time will eventually become blue inside, because you're getting those carbonate or mineral buildups. We have ways to remove this. We use acids, and we also have other detergents and chemicals that we use every day in the shop to clean that off and get down to clean bare metal again. When these buildups get thick enough, or if your horn is stored for a week or two or left in a hot car, the water and oil can evaporate, and it forms crystals that will grow and can actually, well, everyone's experienced frozen valves or seen a horn where the valves or slides were frozen. It's the crystals of these carbonates that cause that. And it's essentially, it's like concrete. It's rock. The chemicals, again, that we use to clean horns, and we also use a ultrasonic cleaning machine that uses actual sound waves, high frequency sound waves, in a detergent solution, and that mechanically is a mechanical scrubbing action that cleans the deposits. I'll pop out the other rotor, and I'll probably, maybe I can angle it so you can see it as I do it. If I can find my tool. And I don't want to get too deep in this stuff because I'm sure there'll be questions, and I want to leave time for questions. So I'm just tapping in the center of the stop arm on the spindle, and you can see the rotors raising up, and I've just stop arm just let go, and push the rotor up. There's the back bearing plate and first valve rotor. To save time and allow more time for questions, I'm going to do a quick wipe down of this guy, and I'll put it back in and restring it. So, and it's too dirty to be able to see it, but this rotor has a couple of things on it. If I get the angle right, you can see the clock markings. There's a 90-degree mark here. These are called witness marks. And the camera is reversed. So it's like I'm trying to do this in a mirror. So it's got witness marks on the top of the rotor, but it's also got usually a number stamped on the top in here underneath the valve plate that tells me this is first valve rotor. Different manufacturers use different marking systems. Japanese horns are marked slightly different than German horns. And some old German horns that we see here in the shop, we usually consider this first, second, and third valve. But we've seen some German manufacturers label them 1, 2, 3, 4, and what we would consider 3, 2, 4, 1. Many times there, and actually on this Hoyer, you probably can't see it, but here on the outside of the rotor casing between the valve tubes and the numbers, there's actually first valve numeral stamped here, second in here, and third in here. Then occasionally we also see German manufacturers, they'll make sets of rotors in series, and we'll see numbers like 15, 16, 17. And then the next horn that they made might be 19, 20, 21. And as long as you pay attention and look for the indications, look for those markings, you can get the horn reassembled correctly. And so much of it really is also common sense. But I'm going to put that rotor back in, and this was the first valve rotor.
Hey, Dennis, just as a heads up, we have about 15 minutes remaining in the session, so feel free to continue, but just be aware of that.
Thank you, Kyle. What if we run over like 30 minutes? Just kidding. There's some 11 or some 10 valve here. Okay, when I assemble, and it pains me to actually put this rotor back in, still being dirty. So this is just for show. I put some, this is our Hetman 13.5. In the shop, we refill these bottles. We buy bulk oil from Hetman. So yeah, it's old, it's been used, but the oil is fresh and clean. That slipped down nicely. I also put some thinner number 12 rotor oil on the face of the rotor. And usually after I get the rotor seated in the casing, I put a little bit, a couple of drops more on top of it. And here I'm lining up. I mentioned the witness marks. There's also a reference mark here on the, actually filed into the edge of the casing. And there's a matching mark on the rotor plate. And line that up, and we use, it would be considered a drift. It's basically almost a thimble with a hole in it to step over the upset on the back bearing plate, and a mallet. We also sell a rawhide mallet. That's part of our maintenance kit, available on the website. And what I've done is I tapped it, and the back bearing plate is actually a press fit. It's quite tight on new horns. On older horns where there's quite a bit of wear, the plates can get loose and actually fall out. But on a new horn that's machined well, these are really nice press, considered press fit. And it's important that the plate fits down perfectly flat. I'm trying to angle it so the camera can see. But if the plate is cocked or angled and not down flat all the way, it will bind the rotor so the rotor can't turn freely. So one check that we find helpful, and this is also something specific to Hoyers. The Hoyer bearing plates fit so tightly that if it's tapped all the way down, the valve sometimes doesn't move. And right now it's in a bind. So all I've done, tap gently from the bottom side. I'm actually driving the rotor up a little bit in the casing. And now it's turning freely. And according to Kyle, I need to hurry up. So I'll get the valve cap on. And I'll flip this guy over. Slip the stop arm on. And I hope you guys can see this. I'm trying to angle it so you can see it. And the stop arm, depending on the manufacturer and the design of the horn, usually on American horns, Cons and Holtons, the stop arms are all same shape and size and design. Some Japanese horns, well, Yamaha, first valve stop arm is a different shape, or the D keyway is cut in a different orientation on second and third valve than on first. And a technician, a repair guy that's putting them together and not paying attention can switch those stop arms. If you reverse them or swap them, the horn won't play. And sometimes I get a call from a band director who had work done by another shop, and they sent my horns off and they came back and they're not playing. And it tells me two things. They assembled it wrong, and they didn't test play it to make sure that it was assembled correctly. And usually it's an easy fix. We can solve it for them or talk them through the repair. So I've got the stop arm on. And the next thing, we finally get back to string theory. For school instruments, we use this bright yellow string. It's made by Yamaha, and it's quite hefty and quite stout. Has a little bit of stretch on professional instruments, and we just had this. There was a teacher in yesterday. We strung her horn with the Yamaha string, which is very durable, but she had been used to our thinner string that I like to put on professional model horns. And she could tell they were kind of sluggish. So this is a 55-pound braided nylon string. And it's a little bit softer, it's more supple, it's thinner, and it actually makes a difference in the valve action. When I tie string, we cut these with a hot knife, and we actually, it's really hard to see it, but we cut a chisel point. Can't get it to the camera. You can see the chisel point there at an angle, and we melt it with a hot knife. And the reason is, if you're on stage and there's downbeats about to happen and you're frantically trying to tie a string, the worst thing that you can experience is trying to tie a frayed string and stick it through those tiny holes. So for the last 30 years, I've cut my strings with a hot knife to melt the fibers together. By the way, we have step-by-step directions on our website for tying strings. And there's even a video on the website too, if you are new to tying your own strings. So I put the knot in the end of the string. I use, these strings are cut at 6 1/4 inches. And we kind of use that for a standard shop length. You put it through the end hole, or the hole toward where your fingers are. And I pull the knot up against the lever arm just to tighten it and make sure there's no slack in it. And I'm going to go around the spindle, the main rotor screw, and then backwards in a figure-8 pattern around the stop arm screw. And I'm also using, you can see I'm using the tip of my screwdriver as a finger to kind of hold things down. I can push the string around and make it behave. So I've made a figure-8 around the main rotor screw, backwards around the stop arm, and then I come back around the backside. And I hope the camera can catch it and that my hand is not in the way. But then I've taken the end of the string and I put it through the end hole in the stop arm, or in the lever arm, and pull it tight. The final thing is I want to go in a clockwise motion around the lever arm string screw, and I want to tuck it under itself. So I don't know if you can see this clearly, but I've gone around in a clockwise direction and then tucked it under itself. Last step is to tighten down the screw. And then I always leave the screw on the stop arm loose until the end. And that's how I adjust. Put it like this. I go in and I actually side across the top of the levers. And second is there's no string on it. But first and second and third are pretty much lined up on the same plane. So I'm going to tighten the stop arm string screw. And it came out pretty nice first try. Of course, it's easy when you do a couple thousand of these. You get pretty good at it. I probably need a break and take time for questions. So I'm going to stop talking and let you guys talk.
All right, great. Thank you for sharing that. And that's great advice for any horn player for sure. So we do have a couple questions. Susan would like to know if you could explain where grease tends to build up and how to minimize that.
Okay, and this horn literally came in. It's not too bad. This is the first time I've pulled that first valve slide. We cleaned a horn earlier today, and some of it is overuse, putting grease too thick of an application. There's also different types of grease. There's sometimes a waxy grease that music stores will sell, and that does tend to kind of ball up on the inside of the tube as you push the slide in and out. I recommend a very thin application of grease. We like the Hetman synthetic products here in the shop, and this is Hetman number 7, and we use it in bulk, and we brush it on with a paintbrush. Let's pretend this slide was clean, but I'll take the brush and I do around the tip of the slide, about a 1/4 inch from the end of the slide. And I've just brushed on a very thin layer. As I push the slide in, it tends to spread the grease all the way up. And this is what we do every day in the shop, cleaning horns and lubricating. That thin application is plenty on most horns. If you get too much grease or if it balls up inside, you almost see like a ring inside on some horns. And the horn we cleaned earlier today had a big rings of gunk. So it was a combination of grease and mineral buildup and food particles. And you can pull the slide, look in the end of the slide and see, oh my gosh, it's really nasty. The cleaner the inside of the slide is, the less likely that grease and other contaminants are going to get down into the valves and cause valve problems. Grease is important to keep the slides lubricated, but too much grease can be a problem. Too much valve oil can be a problem. And what we tend to see is 2 schools of customers: the one that doesn't oil at all and the horn's bone dry, or people that are so conscientious they just oil everything, and there's oil and grease dripping off the slides and under here, and the strings are coated with oil and grease. That's bad too, because dirt and animal hairs and fibers will stick to those parts of the horn and create other problems. So it's kind of like get the Goldilocks amount, just enough grease, but not too much. And I probably should ask or try to handle more questions.
Sure. We have one more from Susan, who wants to know, how do you become a horn repair technician?
I didn't do the traditional way. There are several schools around the country. The one that comes to mind, though, is Red Wing Technical School in Minnesota. There's also one near Denver in Colorado. CMIT, Colorado Musical Instrument Technology. And then there's one up in Renton, Washington. Those are some of the best ways, but most of those courses are a 1-year or 2-year course, and they also want you to learn woodwind repair so you can work in a music store. I never had any interest in working on woodwinds, so I'm mostly self-taught. So in my case, the way the roadmap is, you become private horn teacher in Texas, and you get 50 horn students, and then you see 50 beat up instruments every week. And I gradually started doing cleanings and basic repairs, changing strings on my students' horns. And then as the school year was ending, I'd ask the band directors if they needed some service or repairs on their horns. And after the first couple of years, it was just basic cleanings. But then I gradually learned dent removal and soldering and all the other things that you learn. I have a unique education, most of which took place between midnight and 4 a.m. because I was trying to raise a family and feed my kids at the same time. So I literally stayed up much of the night or all night, many all-nighters. And that was the best incentive to learn, because if I don't get this horn fixed and back together, I won't get paid.
All right, perfect. And maybe we'll finish off with one more quick question. Kathy would like to know what Hetman oil you suggest.
It kind of depends on the age and mechanical condition of your horn. A new horn, or if we rebuild valves, the standard rotor oil that Hetman sells is number 12, but we use mostly number 11, which is a little bit lighter. Even lighter are the piston valve oils, which are Hetman number 1, number 2, and number 3. 1 is the thinnest, and it's literally like water. It's so thin. A brand new horn, or a horn that we have done a full valve rebuild on and replated the valves, we recommend using Hetman 1 for the first year to allow the valves to have a quick action, but also work themselves in. It's like a car engine. There is some break-in time, and the thinner oil is better at first. As the valve gets more wear on it, and eventually the wear turns into mechanical slop, you need something thicker, and that's why we use this Hetman 13. And we actually have real bottles of oil, but again, this is my bench bottle, so it's just labeled with some tape. An older horn is going to need thicker oil, just like an older car engine needs thicker oil, and that helps minimize slop, and it also lasts longer. It doesn't evaporate as quickly. So it kind of depends on your particular horn and the mechanical condition and what you're trying to accomplish. I generally tell customers, use the thickest oil you can stand, because if you feel like your valves are getting gummy and slow, then you need to go something thinner. But the thicker the oil, the better mechanical seal there is on the valves, and also in the windways. A valve like this should literally have an airtight seal between the rotor and the casing wall. But this valve is about 30 years old, and it's got some slop. And that allows air and energy to escape into parts of the horn that aren't intended. So if you're playing on a second valve combination, some of the air and some of the energy, acoustical energy, is getting lost in other parts of the horn. That's the best reason to keep a higher viscosity oil lubricating your horn.
All right, excellent. And unfortunately, that is all the time we do have for questions. I know, Kyle, it's very sad. It's very sad. I wish we could answer all of our questions all night long, because there's so many great ones. But unfortunately,
I do have one graphic to finish up with, and if I can show it.
Absolutely.
Our horns are positive feedback loops. We blow air into the horn, and the horn resonates and amplifies the vibration that we're putting into it. That vibration reflects from the bell back through the horn into our mouth and down into our lungs, which gives us feedback. So we can increase the buzz. The positive feedback loop kind of works like this. Whoops, can't center it. But the buzz is riding on the air, and it creates the vibration reflected by the bell back through the horn into our lungs, which amplifies the buzz. I think that's the coolest thing. And this is the same thing what Derek was showing, the impedance peaks, the resonance peaks of the horn are just, again, natural physical manifestation of the shape of this thing. A trumpet sounds like a trumpet because of the shape. The form creates the function. Again, like Derek said, I'm fascinated by the acoustics, and by the little mechanical vibration I'm putting into the horn is amplified 100 of times from my buzz. So I think that's why we do this, because it's just, we're playing with natural laws of nature, and we get this amazing feedback on this system, this positive feedback system. And then we get to play stuff like Mahler 5 and Chaik 4. It's amazing. And that's why I do it.
Great. Yeah, and that is really cool. And so thank you to Dennis, and thank you to Derek and Karen for sharing all of their expertise with us tonight. It's a really informative session. And again, thank you to all of our audience members for attending this session of the 2021 online KBHC experience, an offering of Cormorant music and our gift to the horn community. You want a chance to chat with friends and acquaintances, new and old? Please join us tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time for social time. A chance to simply chat amongst yourselves, share stories from the week, and commiserate about our collective love for the horn. And at 10 a.m., you'll be able to choose from one of our 2 guided warm-ups. Our KBHC standard warm-up features Bernard Scully, horn soloist, former member of Canadian Brass, artistic director of Kendall Betts Horn Camp, and associate professor of horn at the University of Illinois. It also features Jesse McCormick, second horn of the Cleveland Orchestra, member of the Factory Seconds Brass Trio, horn professor at Baldwin Wallace Conservatory, and associate artistic director of the Kendall Betts Horn Camp. Our featured warm-up will be with Dr. James Nagus, lecturer of horn at the University of Georgia, hornist with the Georgia Brass Quintet, and one of the most actively commissioned and recorded horn composers of music and recorded composers for horn music today. Thank you. In the meantime, please check out our various social media platforms. You can subscribe to our YouTube page by searching for Kendall Betts Horn Camp. You can also find us on Facebook using @KB Horn Camp and Instagram using @official_KBHC. Anytime you post about us or share something we posted, please be sure to include the hashtag KBHC2021. Finally, please visit us at horncamp.org for more information about our upcoming online and in-person offerings. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.